Let's bring in LaTosha Brown, the co-founder of the voting rights organization Black Voters Matter. She supports Biden in her personal capacity, the group, though not affiliated with any candidate. LaTosha, thanks so much for being with us this morning. Do you think the Biden campaign should be more concerned than they at least sound publicly about these numbers?
You know, I do think that we're in an election cycle and that we're just getting started, but we're in this election cycle and we've got to be concerned about what we're hearing from voters. And if voters are not excited or enthusiastic about the election, then we've got to find ways to make sure that we're igniting them. That I don't think this is an election that is going to be based on the excitement of voters, but I do think it's going to be based on the igniting of voting. That you have to ignite voters by literally being able to make that connection to what it is they care about and what your administration can do to push that agenda forward.
Is that what you're hearing on the ground, and specifically about President Biden? Meaning, is what you're hearing on the ground reflective of those numbers? For example, that in 6 swing states right now, according to the New York Times polling, Trump has 22% support among Black voters. He had 8% support last time around.
You know, I'm not hearing as much around Trump. To be honest, the polls, you know, let's be reminded that Trump went out of office having the lowest polling numbers that we've seen in a modern president, right? But yet he is now like the forerunner for the Republican Party. So I think that the polls are an indicator, but I don't think in themselves, like that Black voters that I'm talking to are not going to vote for Trump, that they're not saying that they're supporting Trump. They are not excited necessarily about the election. And I do think that is a burden that I think Biden has a burden that's greater than themselves, that's bigger than themselves, to really get the message.
And that is CNN's reporting that, you know, Democrats inside and outside of the Biden campaign are concerned about just a lack of enthusiasm, particularly among some Black voters. You talk about it, the way you describe it, is the Janet Jackson principle. Explain that to us.
That's right. You know, Janet Jackson had a song that said, "What have you done for me lately?" That oftentimes what we see as political candidates will talk about what they've done, you know, some of the things that they've done in terms of policy for. What I'm seeing with young people now, they want to know, what have you done for me lately? What are you going to do about the rising education costs? What are you going to do about rising housing costs? What are you going to do about the Hamas war that is happening right now in Israel and Hamas war? And so I think it's going to be really important that the Biden administration find the right message to really talk about not what they've already done, but what they are going to do in this next
Just to touch on that last point you made about the president's stance on the Israel-Hamas war and not calling for a ceasefire yet. Another campaign event yesterday where the president was, there were pro-Palestinian protesters outside. This follows earlier this week, more than a dozen times he was interrupted in remarks by protesters who oppose the way this administration has handled this and all of their support for Netanyahu. I wonder if you think that is a change that would make a significant difference politically for the president. Would he call for a ceasefire? I know the White House says this is not about politics, but is that what you're hearing from voters?
That is exactly what I'm hearing from voters, particularly young voters. They want to see a ceasefire. You know, I think that this is like South Africa. I remember being a very, very young woman, and that students actually took on South Africa and what was happening in apartheid. I think what we're seeing right now is that the young people have taken on this foreign policy issue and they want to see a ceasefire. I think it will have a tremendous impact on his campaign election.
LaTosha Brown, thank you, as always, for joining us. You talk to people all the time, and we appreciate you bringing us what you're hearing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.